530 BC. The far northeastern frontier of the known world, beyond the wide cold river the Greeks called the Araxes. On one side stood the largest empire the world had ever seen. On the other stretched an ocean of grass with no cities, no palaces, and no throne to be taken. Imagine you are the most powerful man alive. You have conquered the Medes, humbled the richest king on earth, and walked into Babylon without a battle. Every enemy who ever stood against you is dead, exiled, or kneeling in your court. And now you stand at the very edge of your maps, staring across a river at a people you cannot understand. Because you cannot besiege a city that does not exist. You cannot capture a capital that was never built. And you cannot force a battle on an enemy who simply melts into the open grass whenever you reach for him. That was the problem facing Cyrus the Great, King of Kings, founder of the Persian Empire, and the most successful conqueror the ancient world had yet produced. Behind him stretched a realm that ran from the coast of the Aegean to the edge of India. Before him waited the Massagetae, nomads of the deep steppe. They owned no cities. They drank no wine. And they were led not by a king, but by a widow. Her name was Tomyris. For any ruler with an empire already too vast to govern, this was the moment to turn back. For Cyrus, it became one more border to erase. But the same restless hunger that had built the greatest empire on earth was about to carry him one river too far. And what waited on the far bank would end the life of a man the world believed could not be beaten. It would begin with a trap so clever it worked perfectly. And that, in the end, is exactly what doomed him. Cyrus did not march into the steppe for treasure. The Massagetae had little worth carrying home. He marched because of what an empire becomes when it stops growing. For nearly 30 years, Cyrus had done the impossible again and again. He had risen from a subject king in a Persian backwater to overthrow the Median Empire that ruled him. He had faced Croesus of Lydia, the wealthiest monarch of the age, and broken him. He had taken Babylon, the greatest city on earth, so smoothly that many of its people barely understood their world had changed. Each victory made the next one seem inevitable. Each border he crossed revealed another one just beyond it. The steppe frontier was the empire's raw, unfinished edge. Beyond the Araxes lived horse peoples who answered to no throne and respected no map. To a settled empire, they were a permanent danger, raiders who could strike a rich province and vanish before an army could form. To secure everything he had built, Cyrus believed he had to push the frontier outward one more time and bring the open grass under Persian order. He had spent his life proving that no wall, no river, and no army could stop him. The steppe would be the final proof. But the steppe did not fight the way empires fought. And Cyrus was about to learn that the rules that had carried him across the civilized world did not cross the river with him. The Massagetae were not a normal enemy, and their land was not a normal battlefield. They had no capital to threaten, no fields to burn, no treasury to seize. A settled kingdom gave an invader targets. Take the city, take the king, take the harvest, and the war was won. The steppe gave Cyrus none of that. It gave him distance, grass, and horsemen who could ride for days and appear where no army expected them. The Massagetae fought from the saddle with bows and long spears. They wore bronze and gold, and their whole way of life was built for movement. You could not corner people who carried their homes with them. You could not starve a nation that followed its herds. And you could not win a single decisive victory against an enemy who could simply refuse to stand and fight. Picture the steppe as a Persian soldier would have seen it for the first time. There is no horizon of towers or temples, no smoke from a besieged town to march toward. There is only grass, moving in the wind like water, running flat to the edge of sight in every direction. Somewhere out in it are the people you were sent to conquer, but you cannot see them until they choose to be seen. They come as a dark line of riders on the skyline, loose arrows into your column, and are gone before your own cavalry can form. There is no gate to break here. There is no wall to climb. There is nothing to take and hold. And every day the Empire's supply lines stretch thinner behind you, back toward the river and the world that makes sense. At the head of this people stood Tomyris. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, our main source for everything that follows, and a man writing generations after the events, she had become queen after the death of her husband, and she ruled the Massagetae in her own right. To Cyrus, a widowed queen leading a nation of nomads may have looked like the weakest opponent of his long career. That impression would cost him everything. Cyrus did not begin with an army, he began with an offer. Herodotus records that Cyrus first sent messengers to Tomyris, proposing marriage, presenting himself as a suitor for her hand. On its surface, it looked like peace. A marriage would join the two realms and spare both peoples a war. But Tomyris understood exactly what the offer really was. She saw that Cyrus was not courting her. He was courting her kingdom. Marriage would have made him master of the Massagetae without a single arrow being fired. She refused him. The would-be husband was turned away, and with him went the last chance to take the steppe without blood. So Cyrus turned to the only language he had never failed to win with. He gathered his army, marched to the Araxes, and began building the means to cross it, bridges of boats to carry a great host over the water, and towers on the vessels to protect the men as they went. The most powerful army in the world began preparing to pour into the open grass. And on the far bank, the Massagetae watched the empire come to them. Then Tomyris sent Cyrus a message, and it was not a plea. Herodotus tells us she offered him a choice with cold clarity. "Stop your labor," she said. "Rule your own people, and be content to see us rule ours. But if you are truly set on testing the Massagetae in battle, then there is no need for all this toil at the river. Withdraw your army 3 days' march from the water, and let us cross to meet you on your ground. Or, if you would rather receive us on your side, then you withdraw the same distance and we will come to you. Choose." It was a challenge dressed as courtesy, an invitation to a fair fight from a queen who did not fear the largest empire on earth. Inside the Persian camp, Cyrus called his commanders together, and the war council split. Most of his advisors urged him to let Tomyris and the Massagetae cross the river into Persian-held ground, fight them on his own side, they argued, where his army stood ready and his lines were secure. But one voice disagreed, and it was a voice that knew exactly what it meant to lose everything to Cyrus. Croesus of Lydia, the fallen king. Cyrus had defeated years before and kept as an advisor, spoke against the plan. To pull back and let the enemy cross, he warned, would be a stain on Cyrus's name, for it would look as though the King of Kings had given ground before a woman and her nomads. But Croesus offered more than pride. He offered a trap. "Let the army cross into the enemy's land instead," Croesus advised. "And once across, do not simply fight. Set a snare the Massagetae will not know how to resist. These are people who live hard and simply," he reasoned. "They do not know the luxuries of a rich empire. So, prepare a feast in the camp, slaughter animals without count, lay out food in abundance, and above all, set out great quantities of strong, undiluted wine. Then, leave the weakest part of the army behind with the feast, and pull the best troops back out of sight. The Massagetae will fall on the lightly held camp," Croesus predicted. "They will find the feast. And a people who have never known wine will not stop drinking until the wine has done to them what no Persian spear could." Cyrus listened, and Cyrus agreed. The army crossed the Araxes into the steppe, and the trap was laid exactly as Croesus had described. A camp was left standing, filled with food and heavy with wine, defended by the least of Cyrus's soldiers. Then the king drew his real army back and waited for the grass to bring him his enemy. It worked. A detachment of the Massagetae came upon the camp, and at its head, according to Herodotus, rode Tomyris's own son, a young man named Cambyses. They overwhelmed the small force left to guard the feast, killing the defenders and taking the camp. And then, victorious, they did precisely what Croesus had foreseen. They sat down among the food and the wine. They had won. They celebrated, and they drank a drink their bodies had never learned to handle, until the whole detachment lay heavy and senseless across the captured camp. That was the moment Cyrus had bought with a lie. The Persian army swept back in on the drunken, sleeping Massagetae. They came out of the dark against men who could barely stand, let alone form a line or lift a shield. Herodotus tells us they killed a great many where they lay, and took even more of them alive. The warriors who had ridden in as conquerors of the camp were cut down among the emptied cups, never understanding that the feast had been the weapon all along. Among the captured was Cambyses himself, the queen's son, seized while the wine still held him. In a single night, without a true battle, Cyrus had shattered a Massagetae force and taken the prince of the steppe as his prisoner. To any watching eye, the invincible king had done it again. He had turned an enemy he could not corner into an enemy who had cornered himself. It looked like the cleverest victory of a long and clever life. But a trap that humiliates is not the same as a victory that ends a war, and Cyrus had just taught the steppe something about him that could never be untaught. When Cambyses woke and the wine drained from him, he understood what had happened. He was a prisoner. His men were dead or captured. He had led his mother's warriors into a feast and lost them to a cup. Herodotus records that the young man, once he grasped the full shame of it, asked Cyrus to free him from his bonds, and the moment he was released, he took his own life rather than live as the drunken prince who had been snared like an animal. The heir of the Massagetae was gone, not to a Persian blade, but to his own hand and his own disgrace. And here the whole campaign turned, because a man who wins by making his enemy despise him has not weakened that enemy. He has removed the one thing that might have saved him, the enemy's willingness to show mercy in return. Cyrus had not beaten the Massagetae. He had enraged them, and he had killed their queen's only son by a trick. There is a difference between a defeat that ends a war and a wound that begins a blood feud. Cyrus had chosen the second, and he did not yet understand it. Tomyris understood it completely. When word reached her of the trap, of the slaughter of her warriors, and of the death of her son, she did not break. Herodotus preserves the message she is said to have sent to Cyrus, and whether the words are exact or the memory of a storyteller, the meaning has echoed for 25 centuries. "You have not won by courage or by strength of arms," she told him. "You won with the fruit of the vine, the wine that poisons your own judgment when it fills you. You stole my child with a poison, not a battle. So hear me now, and take my advice, for I mean to give you good counsel. Give me back my dead, leave this country, and go unpunished for what you did to a third part of my army. Refuse, and I swear by the sun, the lord of the Massagetae, that for all your greed for blood, I will give you your fill of it." Cyrus refused. He had never turned back from a frontier, and he would not turn back now for a queen's threat. And so Tomyris did what nomads had refused to do all along. She stopped running. She gathered the full strength of the Massagetae, every rider, every spear, the whole force of a people who now fought not for territory, but for vengeance. The war Cyrus had wanted, the single decisive battle he could never force, was finally coming to him. But it was coming on the enemy's terms, from an enemy with nothing left to lose. What followed, Herodotus calls the fiercest battle ever fought between peoples beyond the Greek world. The two armies met on the open ground, and by the ancient account, it began at a distance, both sides pouring arrows into each other, the sky between them going dark with shafts, men and horses falling before a single sword was drawn. They shot until the quivers ran dry and the arrows were spent, and still neither line had broken. Then there was nothing left but to close. The Massagetae and the Persians came together with spears and long daggers, and the fighting collapsed into the brutal, grinding work of men killing each other by hand. There was no formation left to hold after the first shock. Only knots of men pressed too close to run. Horses screamed and went down. Dust rose off the dry grass and hung over everything, so that the battle became a thing of shapes and noise, spear points coming out of the haze, the ground turning to mud that was not made of water. There was no clever ground here for Cyrus to exploit, no river to bridge, no city wall to breach, no trick left to play. This was the one kind of fight the steppe had denied him for the whole campaign, and now that it had come, the Massagetae did not give way. They had absorbed his cunning and buried their prince, and they fought with the fury of people who had decided that only one of these two armies would leave the field. Hour after hour the battle held, savage and unyielding, and slowly, terribly, the largest and most experienced army in the world began to break against a nation of nomads who simply would not stop. By the end, Herodotus tells us, the greater part of the Persian army was destroyed on that ground, and somewhere in the ruin of it, after nearly 30 years of conquest and a lifetime without a single true defeat, Cyrus the Great was killed. The King of Kings, the man who had taken Babylon and humbled Lydia and forged an empire from the Aegean to India, fell in the open grass at the edge of the world, beaten by the one enemy he had been warned to leave alone. The victory belonged to Tomyris, and she took a price the ancient world never forgot. According to the most famous version Herodotus records, and he is careful to note that many different stories were told of how Cyrus died, and that this was only the one he found most credible. The queen searched the field for the body of the man who had killed her son. When it was found, she filled a skin with human blood, and she is said to have thrust the head of Cyrus into it, telling the dead king that she was keeping the oath she had sworn. "You thirsted for blood," she said. "Now drink your fill." Whether it happened exactly so, or whether the story grew in the telling, is beyond us now. But the meaning the ancients attached to it was unmistakable. The greatest conqueror alive had been given, at the last, precisely what he came for. Cyrus's death did not destroy the empire he had built. That is the strange truth of it. His son Cambyses inherited the throne, and Persia remained the dominant power of the age. Within a generation, Persian armies would march on Egypt, and the empire would grow larger still. The Massagetae did not follow Cyrus's body across the river. They had never wanted his empire, they had only wanted him gone from their grass. The frontier Cyrus died trying to erase simply closed again behind him, as if the steppe had swallowed the proof that he had ever crossed it. But something did break that day, and it could not be repaired. For 30 years, the world had believed a single, dangerous idea, that Cyrus could not be beaten. Kings had surrendered on that belief. Cities had opened their gates on it. The whole authority of the young empire rested on the sense that resisting the King of Kings was simply futile. And beyond the Araxes, a widow with a bow and a grievance had proven the idea false. The man could die, the army could be destroyed, the conqueror could be outlasted by people he had dismissed as beneath him. That knowledge moved faster than any horseman. It told every subject people and every watching enemy a thing they were never supposed to learn, that Persia's greatest weapon had always been the belief in Persia, and that belief could bleed. The lesson of the Far River was older than Cyrus, and it has outlived every empire since. A conqueror who cannot stop is not destroyed by the strongest wall or the richest kingdom. He is destroyed by the one border he should have left alone. A man who wins by making his enemies despise him buys a victory that turns to poison. And a ruler who mistakes a proud people for a weak one because they own no cities and answer to no throne learns too late that there are nations you cannot conquer, because there is nothing to take but their lives, and they will trade yours for it. Cyrus had spent his life turning the impossible into a battlefield. He had bridged rivers, toppled the richest king of the age, and made the greatest city on earth his own. But the last river he crossed did not lead to another throne. It led to a stretch of grass, a queen who would not be bought, and a trap that worked so well, it woke the very fury that killed him. He came to the edge of the world looking for one more border to erase. He found the one that erased him. And when the news traveled back across the Araxes and down into the heart of the empire he had made, it carried a warning that would shadow every king who came after, that the road of endless conquest has an end, and that somewhere on it waits the enemy who finally says, no further. For the sons of Cyrus, that road now turned toward Egypt and toward a new generation of impossible wars. But the grass beyond the river kept its secret, and the King of Kings never marched home.